that is what we need to remember as a society. You can do it with love, you can do it with compassion and respect for individuals and with humanity and dignity, but you need to do the hard work. And sometimes it's the hard things that lead people to freedom from addiction, freedom from homelessness, and give their life meaning and value again.
Welcome to the OpEdge, the Gazette's opinion podcast, where we bring you cutting-edge perspectives from Colorado's top newsmakers, columnists, and more. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, investigative columnist and your host for today's program. I'm joined today by Meghan Shay, CEO of Step Denver and Step Springs, which are residential addiction recovery programs dedicated to helping men end the cycle of substance abuse and retake agency in their lives. Meghan, welcome to the OpEdge.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here with you.
It's good to have you on. So let's talk for a moment, sort of big picture, about the philosophy here behind Step Denver, Step Springs, that really is the basis for the way that your programs go about what you do. And then we'll talk about the brass tacks of how you accomplish your objectives.
Absolutely. Well, it really starts with the core fundamental belief that people are capable. Often in our society, when we look at responses to homelessness or addiction or other issues, well-meaning nonprofits end up in a situation in which they're trying to do for others what they are capable of doing for themselves. And when you do that, you are stripping someone of the feeling of accomplishment and achievement and self-worth and self-esteem and all of those things that are so vital for progress and for a good quality of life for any of us. STEP's model really believes that men are capable, and anyone who is ready and willing can overcome every consequence that they have experienced as a result of their addiction, including homelessness, including criminal backgrounds, including all of these things that have been stacked against them for decades, that they can overcome those, they can become free of their addiction, and that they can build a life of meaning and purpose again. This model really is what's best for the individual. And it gives them the ability to celebrate their wins, to own their accomplishments. We're just along for the ride to help them and support them and make sure that they have the structure and accountability and support necessary to be successful.
So from your extensive experience in the nonprofit world, even before joining up with Step Recovery, Step Denver, Step Springs, what has your experience taught you about why it's so important to come into this kind of crucial work with that overriding philosophy that all of your work is surrounding?
Well, it starts with letting the people that you're serving be the center of your work. I have experienced in the nonprofit world organizations that, for better or worse, chase money. And that's the only way I can really describe it, is that they are dropping, altering, adding programs based solely on where the money is coming down the pipeline at any given time. They're not centering the people that they're serving and what's best for them in their work, in their decisions. That's what's so refreshing about STEP. When I came to STEP just over 7 years ago, I couldn't believe what I was witnessing, because every conversation is based on what is best for the men we serve. The groundbreaking thing that I experienced and learned at STEP is that real compassion often shows up as consequences, and that consequences save lives. In the nonprofit world, you have a lot of compassionate people who are trying to do all the good that they can, but they end up doing more harm by doing compassionate work that strips someone of their personal responsibility. And at STEP, we are holding people accountable. We have expectations. We often say in this society where everything is meet you where you're at, for the population we're serving, where you're at is not working for you, right? It's led you to homelessness. It's led you down a path of misery and despair. How about you meet us where we're at? And we're going to help you get there, but we're not going to come down and into the pits of despair and suffering and behaviors that are leading your life to destruction. We're going to expect that you rise to this opportunity, and we know you can. We trust you. We believe that you can, and we're going to give you that opportunity. And time again, we see that men do. That's really the step difference, though, is that accountability piece and understanding that if you enable, you are doing more harm to the individual than if you hold them accountable and set some expectations and let them rise to the occasion, because they will.
And that's exactly why I wanted to start with that philosophy, because I don't think you can address the problem, even talk about the problem that in every nonprofit is working to solve some sort of problem or issue. But in this case, talking about the problem and talking about the solution, if we don't have an understanding of where you're coming from, it doesn't give us that full picture. So with that noted, if you were to identify the fundamental problem, the issue, the social challenge that STEP is geared to address, how would you put it?
We pride ourselves in the fact that we specialize. You often see organizations trying to be all things to all people. What ends up happening is maybe all of their programs are not the quality that they could be because they're stretched too thin. STEP has really done a great job identifying where the primary need is for our mission, where we have the expertise to step in and do a lot of good and actually get outcomes. And that is addressing homelessness and addiction among the male population. I say that as a female leader of an all-male organization. And I have this great love, frankly, for a mission, an organization that is saying we're not necessarily going to focus on what's trendy. It is not warm and fuzzy to serve this population. This is not a cause people are typically drawn to. I have that much more respect for our donors for supporting these men, because they see that they are also worthy of this support, this opportunity and compassion. And that if you can help a man who has, over the years struggled with addiction, found themselves homeless, found themselves incarcerated, all of those consequences stacked against them because of this disease, if you invest in that person who is willing to invest in themselves, there is a ripple impact on families, on employers, children. It is immeasurable, but it is certainly an unusual cause that most are not drawn to. It is the single issue that most societies are struggling with, though. I think we can both agree homelessness and addiction are the root cause of the majority of society's ills, and are issues that cities are struggling to solve. I would say they're struggling to solve it because they're not accurately naming the problem, and they're not putting addiction at the center of this issue.
Yeah, and so Meghan, when we talk about addiction, when we talk about getting along the path to recovery and sort of righting the ship, are there any common threads that you notice that STEP works on with the men that come through the program that sort of connect in terms of the challenges that they're dealing with, or the things that they need in their lives to make it possible to achieve something better?
Well, it starts with the most important part of our mission, which is the peer component. 100% of our program and operations staff in Denver are alumni of our program, and nearly all of our staff at Step Springs in Colorado Springs are also alumni of our program. The remainder of the staff are men in long-term recovery who have had these same experiences. I cannot express strongly enough how important it is to have the credibility, trust, and respect of those leading the program being individuals who have walked this path themselves. They are uniquely qualified, they are the experts, and when you are faced with what our men walking through our doors are faced with, which is the fear of what is ahead of them, imagine rebuilding your life from the ground up, how daunting that is. Imagine the lack of self-worth, imagine that they feel dehumanized by the experiences that they've had, to walk in the door and be greeted by a man who sees you, who knows exactly what you're going through, and is living proof of what's possible for you. That's the heart of all of it. From there, practically, we get into the work of teaching men how to stay sober. How can you find freedom from your addiction and have it last long term? How can you become self-sufficient? We get men back into the workforce, get them showing up and earning a living, putting money in the bank, saving for their future, having that financial stability that brings peace, but also the ability to contribute to your city and show up in society as someone who is productive and has purpose. And we also teach life skills. So you imagine some men maybe don't have life skills, that they may not have learned in their upbringing, although most had good upbringings. It's just addiction that destroyed their life. But if you've been living on the streets for 10 years, 8 years, I just heard of a man in our program who has been homeless off and on for 18 years. When you have been living that life for so long, any life skills you had may have been lost along the way. So it's just restoring those basic fundamentals and building some structure and discipline into your days so that you can have peace. Frankly, that's what our men are chasing, and it is what they find here.
You mentioned the word self-sufficient. When it comes to that idea of agency, how critical is that both to the process of recovery, sobriety, and maintaining that sobriety, and specifically to the work that you do at Step Denver and Step Springs?
Well, it starts with personal responsibility, and I think any of us who have had any connection to any individual suffering the disease of addiction, we understand that with that comes blaming, lying, and manipulating. That is pretty central to those who are active in their addiction, and it's a defense mechanism, frankly, for most. We have to kind of break that down, and it starts with personal responsibility, that you are responsible for your choices, actions, and behaviors. Those have outcomes. Positive outcomes are rewards, negative outcomes are consequences. So a lot of our program is just sort of reorienting a person to the standards that we all live by in society, in which our actions have outcomes, and we take personal responsibility for those, and that you're going to make mistakes, but you need to own it. You need to make it right, you need to make amends, and you need to change your behavior moving forward to do better. That's all we're looking for is effort and progress. We do not serve perfect people, nor are any of us providing these services perfect ourselves. We really are just asking that people put in the effort and make progress. The self-sufficiency component is huge in that most individuals who've been living in this life cycle for so long, where they've been in that shelter shuffle, have been dependent. They've been living off of government resources. They've been in the food line at the shelter. They've been doing all of those things that make them feel, in many cases, like a victim. And we're allowing them to feel like a victor through their effort. And we're giving them the ability to have that incredible feeling of standing on your own 2 feet, not being dependent, and frankly, becoming even more than an independent person, someone who can give back. That it doesn't just stop with you take care of yourself. It leads to you're able to contribute and give back and help others. And that's ultimately the goal for the men that we're serving. I had a man one day in the dining room say to me, "You know what I love about this place? You treat me like a grown man." And that starts with certain things that we have the men doing in their day-to-day life, doing their own laundry, making their bed, cooking their own food, things that seem common and normal. But in most programs, that is not the experience that you're having. And we are restoring dignity in this process.
In just a moment, we'll talk about the program, but I do want to ask you, because when you talk about addiction as a disease, but also personal responsibility, some might hear that and say, well, wait a second, how is that connected when you're talking about a disease? How does ownership come in? But they are interconnected, right? You can acknowledge that addiction is a disease, but that in order to get on the path to recovery, you have to recognize and acknowledge where you are and take responsibility for your own actions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think, we now have the science to understand the disease of addiction, and that's been helpful in stripping away some of the judgment that comes with this disease. Understanding that when someone is caught up in the cycle of addiction, in most cases, they lose the ability to make a choice, to make good choices for themselves. That's why we find that the best place someone can go that leads them to a program like ours is to detox. You need to be free of these substances to have the clarity of thought to be able to make a good decision for yourself and ultimately save your own life. So there is that scientific element here that is in play that's important to acknowledge. With that, once your mind and body are free of these substances, you are now responsible for your choices, actions, and behaviors. And so that's kind of the message we're saying is we understand that when you were caught up in that cycle, you did things that that would potentially caused harm to yourself, to others, that you were not making good choices, and that you were taking from society instead of contributing. Now that you are free of these substances, you can be who you really are, and we're going to help you do that. So the personal responsibility really comes into play when you're no longer under the influence. It doesn't mean that no one should be accountable for things that they do while they're under the influence, but we do need to understand the difference, and that when someone is in that fight for finding the next high, and basically I think also going through some physical things that we should all acknowledge. There are some people who continue using because they're trying to avoid the physical withdrawals that happen. So it becomes this vicious cycle. Once someone can detox, they can break free of that cycle. And then they need a program like ours to be able to learn how to live again.
Give us sort of the basic overview of what you do at Step Denver and Step Spring, starting with who qualifies for these programs, because I think you don't just accept anybody who's struggling with addiction. We'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, but also what are some of the things, even the tasks you talked about, day-to-day tasks that they're asked to do when they're part of the program, the things that are involved.
Sure. Well, the most important thing for people to know is that we're providing same day intake and there's no cost to enter. So any man who's ready and willing can pick up the phone or walk in our door Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to noon. And if approved for the program, they'll be coming in at 2:30 that same day. The only thing that will get you disqualified is, any kind of crime that was of a severe nature against another human being. And so we understand that with addiction comes a lot of assault, domestic violence, robberies. There are going to be extensive criminal pasts. One of the first man to complete our program at Step Springs had 34 felonies when he came into our program, and he was successful. And I can get into that a little bit more, but I don't want to go too far down the road without covering the program. But we see varied backgrounds coming into this program. We have men who come in with master's degrees and who had successful careers that led them to great heights until their addiction took over and destroyed everything. So that immediate access is vital. We do not bill Medicaid. We do not bill insurance. We are entirely funded through philanthropy. We remain independent of government funding intentionally so that we can have a program that's actually effective and that we don't fall, victim to what we just talked about, which is nonprofits altering programs and not having the intended outcomes because they've chased money. So we're very grateful that our donors support us so that we can remain independent of that government funding and give everyone access. The program is anywhere from 4 to 6 months to 2 years, depending on the time frame that a man is going to need. But from the moment they come in, they're getting addiction recovery, workforce development, and life skills programming, again, led by those peers. But we provide everything from one-on-one peer coaching and our own curriculum that covers addiction recovery and life skills to dental services, nutrition, 7 habits for highly effective people, family reconciliation therapy. We're doing all sorts of programming throughout the week that is really addressing every aspect of a man's life that's been destroyed. I sort of call it no stone left unturned. You name a part of a man's life that's been destroyed, we've got something to support them in rebuilding. In this process, what really makes Step unique is that the men are out in the world from day one. So they're going through our first week of orientation, but after that, they're out of the house all day, working or looking for work. 78% of our men get full-time tax-paying jobs in under 45 days in the program, and they are earning really solid salaries that are allowing them to build thousands of dollars in savings to prepare for transition to independent housing when they leave, truly independent, self-supported housing. And so that is the progression from the career path, that we're getting them those stability jobs, getting them back into the workforce, and then helping them build up to career higher paying positions in the community. But they're tax-paying members of our society from 30 to 45 days into the program for most. But it is really centered around community. And this residential program allows them to go out into the world, put into practice everything they're learning in our programming, come back home, learn some more in our programming that happens between 4 and 9 p.m., and go back out the next day and try again. So you build this stability and foundation that leads to successful outcomes, which I'd love to share with you, but I also don't want to keep you from asking
Sure.
what your next question.
No, I appreciate it. That's a great explanation, and we can look at a couple of different aspects to this. But I do want to ask you, in the work that you do and the programs that you just described, how important is the role of accountability in all of this, and making sure that there's accountability both from the outside and, from within the person himself?
Well, we all need structure and discipline. I think we can all agree that that's really vital for our existence and for our quality of life, that we have that sense of discipline within ourselves and structure and routine in our day-to-day. What I have found in speaking with the men in our program is that they choose to come to STEP because they're seeking accountability. They know that's what's been lacking. They've tried, in some cases, I've heard, we've got a gentleman, Kyle, who's 7 years sober now out of our program. He went through 6 different treatment centers before coming to STEP. Our COO of STEP Springs went to 18 different treatment centers before coming to STEP. We have a donor now who went through STEP a little over 3 years ago. Prior to that, he went through 12 different treatment centers, including Betty Ford twice. So talk about prestigious, right? Ended up homeless in Colorado Springs, and a friend drove him to STEP Denver, and that was over 3 years ago. He's now a business owner and a donor of our program, so supporting our program. So time and time again, I've heard and met men who have tried all of the traditional models, and what was lacking was accountability. They were in a lockdown facility, an inpatient facility, getting lots and lots of therapy, and they weren't getting any practical tools to apply in their life, and they weren't in an environment that allowed them to put it into practice in real time. Most importantly, they were not being cared for by staff who were holding them accountable. So it's, I think, leads me to have great respect for our men, knowing that they are seeking accountability and structure because they know that's what they need to be successful. And that is surprising, I think, to most people.
Well, it goes back to what you said earlier, with one man saying, in the lunchroom or whichever room, he said, "I'm grateful you treat us like men."
Right.
That's accountability too, right?
Yes. We need, the other thing we have to consider is that when you have been living in this chaos and survival mode for so many years, it takes time to build order in your life. It takes somebody on the outside holding you to certain standards until you are in a position in which those are normal for you, and that you don't have to think so hard to do the right thing, that it comes naturally to you to show up in the world in a certain way. We talk about a behavioral change, and it takes time to affect that behavioral change, but it's done by people who are doing it with love and compassion. So this accountability is not cruel, it's not mean, it's with love and respect. And because it's being delivered by people who are walking the walk, the men are very receptive to it. The people holding them accountable have been held to the same standard. They're living proof that it works, and the men can tell the difference. They know it's not heavy-handed. They know it's in their best interest that they're being held to these standards, and when they rise to the occasion, they feel a great sense of pride for themselves.
A few minutes ago, Meghan, you wanted to talk about some of the success of the program, maybe share a couple of stories. Please do spotlight that, because when you take this approach from the philosophy that you're talking about to the program elements that exemplify that philosophy, how it turns out, how it works out for people, and has, from a tried and true program that has been around for a lot of years, helping men get off on the right foot. Talk to us. Share some of those stories.
Sure. Well, the numbers speak for themselves. That accountability that we just talked about applies to us as well. So when I talk about accountability, in this role, I'm talking about being accountable to the people we're serving, being accountable to our funders to make sure we're doing the most good with the resources that they've made sacrifices to provide, and being accountable to our community, of course, making sure that we're getting the intended outcome and we're fulfilling our mission. We do that by follow-up outcome measurement. So we have recovery support managers who are leading this program, working directly with the men. They follow up with men at 6 different intervals in the 12 months after they leave our program and do an additional 18-month follow-up. Those calls are an opportunity for them to continue coaching the individual if they're going through challenges or struggles, or maybe they're not sober, right? Being able to step in and help that person get back on track. That's really important. And that's why these are done in a very personal way, where they're calling, not sending out a survey. So in that conversation, they're collecting data as well. And we're recording the outcomes that we're seeing with our men. We have a contact rate that is unheard of in this industry, and outcomes that are more than double the national average consistently. Last year in the Denver program, we were able to reach 172 men in the 12 months after they left our program, which is, again, pretty astounding. Yeah. The year prior, it was 140 men, so we just keep going up. But we were able to reach 172 men. Of those, 85% still had stable housing, 74% still had full-time tax-paying jobs, and 87% were still sober out of 172 men. So that data tells us that this model, this methodology works in a way that no other program does. And it's not to diminish other programs in the work that they're doing. There's a time and place for everyone to go have different experiences. But we really hold ourselves to a high standard, and we make sure that what we're doing is getting the intended result. Right now, we're really diving into the employment piece, because that seems to be an area where men are struggling long term after leaving our program. It's not as high as the sobriety rate, not as high as the stable housing rate. And so we've just revamped our career curriculum for the first time in 10 years, and we did a deep dive. We made a lot of changes and improvements to just update our curriculum based on what men are experiencing right now. And that's how we use the data too, to keep getting better, keep making sure that our program is as effective as it should be. And we never settle for more than double the national average. We want to keep climbing, and we believe that our men are capable of great things.
As we start to wrap up with you, Meghan Shay, and so appreciate this conversation. It's fascinating to hear you explain in detail so many of these things. There's a wide policy discussion that, of course, is ongoing about addressing issues of homelessness and substance abuse. From your experience, from what Step Denver, Step Springs have done in terms of their work and the engagement with so many men, are there any lessons or any pieces of insight that you can provide that might be useful for policymakers as they consider where they want to head in a policy direction?
We face this often as we are on the side of this work that is just responding when a man is ready. There's so much that happens prior to a man finding their way to our door, and we don't have much control over those systems. What we find is a lack of accountability, lack of consequences. I have to tell you, prior to coming to STEP, my views were quite different, and I've been shaped by the men and them sharing with me their experiences. They have changed the way that I view these issues. They've helped me to understand that the threat of jail and the consequence of going to jail saves lives. That being involuntarily placed in a hospital or detox stay is life-saving, and that there are times that we as a society may need to save someone until they can save themselves, and give them the opportunity to do so. When someone is caught up in that cycle, they, again, just don't have the choice or ability oftentimes. We need to show up in ways that drive them towards the help that is so readily available. We did a survey of men in our program to find out what were the motivating factors that led them to our program, and more than half said jail or the threat of jail. Being exposed to the elements. If you make it too easy to be homeless, You make it too comfortable out there, men may never find their way to real help and get the lives back that they frankly deserve, but they've just been stripped of through their addiction. And what we have seen is we've got actually one gentleman named Derek who came through our program almost coming up on 5 years ago now. And he had been stabbed in his spine and kidney behind Union Station in Denver, was in ICU for a couple of months. That wasn't enough to do it, right? It was waking up underneath a couple of inches of snow and saying, I can't do another winter homeless in Colorado. That's what led him to walk to a detox. And in the detox, they gave him a list of resources and he found Step Denver. And he's now almost 5 years sober. So these are the things that I've learned that he told me, and this may sound a bit extreme, but he said, if you had even so much as given me a bottle of water, you would have been enabling me and prolonging the suffering, because he needed to get uncomfortable enough to say enough. That is what we need to remember as a society. You can do it with love, you can do it with compassion and respect for individuals and with humanity and dignity, but you need to do the hard work. And sometimes it's the hard things that lead people to freedom from addiction, freedom from homelessness, and give their life meaning and value again.
I can't think of a better way to end this conversation, Meghan. And I do want to note also, it's my understanding that you are also on the board of Advanced Pathways in Aurora. We just had Mayor Mike Kaufman on the podcast and talked about Advanced Pathways program for helping the homeless in Aurora and around the Denver metro area. So I appreciate that your work continues in various aspects.
Thank you. Well, that's just a volunteer passion project because I believe in the vision for what Advanced Pathways can be, and we're all committed to getting it to that point. And it's been quite a journey. They've got a wonderful team working very hard to do something different. And I will always be on board with those who are willing to do the hard work and try something new because people deserve better.
There you go. Meghan Shay, CEO of Step Denver and Step Springs. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the OpEdge. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please drop us a like, subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. For the Gazette, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger.